Welcome to the My Bard story.
And welcome. It's good to be diving deep with you again. Today we're focusing on, well, a really pivotal passage, Genesis chapter 17, looking closely at verses 15 through 27.
Yes, this part of Genesis 17 is just so rich. It's where God brings Sarah right into the heart of the covenant promise regarding Isaac, the specific heir.
And it really reinforces that sign of the covenant, circumcision, which was introduced just before this.
Our guide for this discussion is our study note, which pulls together insights from quite a range of scholarly perspectives. Think of it as a helpful companion resource.
That's right. And our aim is to unpack these verses, understand their meaning in the bigger picture of God's covenant, and maybe most importantly, see what they offer us today.
Especially for those of you listening who are in ministry, thinking about the practical applications and, well, the encouragement found here.
Exactly. So God has just appeared to Abraham, changed his name, reaffirmed the covenant, given the command for circumcision.
And now the focus sharpens dramatically. It's made absolutely clear that the promised line, the covenant heir, will come specifically through Sarah.
This is huge. It elevates her status and pinpoints the channel for God's redemptive plan in a way that hadn't been stated so explicitly before.
Okay, let's get into the text. We'll start with Genesis 17, verse 15, reading from the NIV. God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah."
Okay, so straight away, you notice the parallel with Abraham's own name change earlier in the chapter. God is directly intervening again.
It's not just Abraham getting a new name, Sarai does too. From Sarai, that's Shin Resh Yod in Hebrew, to Sarah Shin Resh He.
Right, and while scholars debate the exact meaning of Sarai, Sarah is generally understood as meaning princess or perhaps noble woman.
So it's an elevation.
Definitely an elevation. God is signifying her enhanced role, her royal destiny, if you will, as the mother of nations and kings. It's preparing everyone for what's coming.
And it's significant that God tells this to Abraham, reinforcing his headship.
But the message is entirely about her and her future role. It emphasizes that this covenant involves the whole household, and Sarah is absolutely central, not just a supporting character.
A divinely commissioned matriarch. That sets the stage perfectly for the next verse. Let's read verse 16. "I will bless her, and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her."
Wow. Okay, so first, the double blessing. I will bless her, I will bless her. God really emphasizes his favor towards her.
And then the absolute core of it. "And will surely give you a son by her." No ambiguity now.
No. And the notes mention the Hebrew verb tense here, natati, a perfect tense suggesting certainty. It's as good as done in God's economy. I have given, almost.
It nails down that the heir isn't Ishmael, but a son specifically from Sarah.
Exactly. And look at the scope of the blessing, mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. It mirrors Abraham's promise.
She's elevated to this parallel status as a progenitor of nations within the covenant.
And you just have to think about the context. She's 90. This promise is a direct display of God's power, completely outside the realm of natural possibility.
It underscores her indispensable role. The specific chosen line comes through her.
Yeah.
So faced with this incredibly specific and frankly unbelievable promise, how does Abraham respond? Verse 17. "Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, 'Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90?
Okay, this is fascinating. First, reverence. He falls face down, just like he did earlier when God appeared. It's awe, submission.
But then laughter, wayuk, and that internal dialogue, just spelling out the sheer human impossibility of it all.
Right, and scholars, as the notes point out, have really wrestled with this laughter. What kind is it?
Is it pure joy, like, wow, this is amazing, laughter?
Yeah, it's one possibility. Or is it, tinged with incredulity, skepticism, like, seriously, God, at our age?
Given what he says to himself, and then his plea for Ishmael right after, scholars like Hamilton and Walke suggest there's definitely an element of doubt or perhaps astonished disbelief in there.
The human logic just kicks in, right? 100 years old, 90 years old. It doesn't compute.
I like how Joyce Baldwin puts it, something like faith's expectancy hitting a wall of fear that maybe he misunderstood. It's not rejecting God, but grappling.
Grappling is a good word. He believes God, Genesis 15.6 says so, but this specific promise pushes the boundaries of what seems possible.
And of course, this laughter is the first mention connected to Isaac, Yitzhak. He laughs. It's woven right into the story from the start.
It perfectly sets the stage for God to demonstrate his power precisely where human ability ends and, well, where human laughter begins, whether from joy or doubt.
So in that moment of grappling, Abraham voices a different desire in verse 18. And Abraham said to God, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing."
Ah, this is so human, isn't it? A father's love. Lu Yishmael Shime. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you, living your favor, under your blessing.
What's driving this, do you think? Is it just love for the son he already has?
I think that's a huge part of it. He cares for Ishmael, wants God's best for him.
But could it also be a bit of hedging his bets? Like, okay, God, the Sarah thing sounds unlikely. How about we focus on Ishmael, the son who's actually here?
It's probably a mix. The notes suggest that complexity, love for Ishmael, yes, but perhaps also that lingering human difficulty in fully embracing the miraculous, the impossible. Ishmael is tangible, 13 years old.
The son through Sarah is still just an astonishing promise. It shows Abraham wrestling, his deep affection, but also maybe struggling to let go of the more, logical path. But God's reply in verse 19 is incredibly direct, no wiggle room. Then God said, "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you are to call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him."
That first word, Allah, often translated yes, but, or indeed, is key. God acknowledges the sentiment about Ishmael.
He'll address that in a moment.
Exactly. But he immediately pivots back. Indeed, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son. It's emphatic, certain.
And he names him Isaac, Yitzhak, from Idog to laugh, directly linking the son to Abraham's reaction, a constant reminder of the miracle.
But the absolute theological heart of it is, I will establish my covenant with him, Isaac, as an everlasting covenant, for his descendants. This is the law.
Lasting. That's crucial.
It is. Isaac, son of Sarah, is the chosen heir. The primary eternal covenant relationship flows through him. It's definitive.
But even while making that absolutely clear, God circles back to Abraham's concern for Ishmael in verse 20. "And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation."
This is just beautiful. God's grace. I have heard you, Immatia. And the notes point out the lovely wordplay on Ishmael's name, Yumalo. God hears.
It's like God is saying, "You named him well, Abraham. I have heard your heart for him."
And the blessings aren't small. Surely bless him, make him fruitful, greatly increase his numbers, echoes of promises to Abraham himself.
And specifically, father of 12 rulers, 12 chieftains or princes. That immediately makes you think of Jacob's 12 sons, doesn't it?
It does. It's a parallel structure. And Ishmael will become a great nation, Letogol, again mirroring Abraham's promise. These are significant, substantial blessings.
But as scholars like Hamilton and Waltke stress, they're distinct blessings, separate from the unique, everlasting covenant established only with Isaac.
Precisely. God is gracious and attends to Abraham's fatherly heart, but he maintains the specific channel for his redemptive covenant history. Ishmael is blessed, but Isaac carries the covenant.
And just to ensure there's absolutely no confusion, God reiterates one more time in verse 21. "But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year."
That "but" to Trinity, as for my covenant. It sharply contrasts with the blessings just listed for Ishmael. It draws the line again.
My covenant. Exclusively with Isaac.
Exclusively. And then the timing, adding that extra layer of specificity and, well, impossibility from a human view. By this time next year.
It leaves no doubt about who or when. It really sets the clock ticking for this miraculous birth. Verse 22 then marks the end of this particular divine conversation. "When he had finished speaking with him, God went up from Abraham."
Simple, direct language. God went up from Abraham. It's typical language. We see it elsewhere, marking the end of a theophany.
The direct, manifest presence withdraws.
Right. God has spoken. The promises are clear. The command for the sign is given. Now it's Abraham's turn to respond.
And his response is immediate and thorough, as we see starting in verse 23. "On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael, and all those born in his household or bought with his money, every male in Abraham's household, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskins as God told him."
On that very day, PM Hayam Haza. That phrase jumps out, doesn't it? It gets repeated later, too.
It does. Scholars like Waltke and Baldwin really emphasize this. It signals immediate obedience. No procrastination.
He heard, he acted. And look how comprehensively, not just himself and Ishmael.
No, everyone. Those born in his household, likely slaves born within his large household structure.
And those bought with his money, foreign-born slaves. The text stresses every male in Abraham's household, total inclusion.
And Abraham himself performs the rite, exactly as God told him. This is the physical act of accepting the covenant. It's tangible faith.
It's the human ratification, not just hearing, but doing, even when it involves something, well, personally demanding and affecting his entire household.
Then the text gives us their ages, starting with Abraham in verse 24. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin.
99? It drives home the point about his age again. This wasn't easy.
No. Undergoing this at 99, it underscores the physical cost involved.
It really magnifies the obedience, doesn't it? It wasn't a symbolic gesture without personal cost. It highlights his commitment in a very physical way.
And then Ishmael's age in verse 25. And his son Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin.
13, also significant. As John Walton points out, this age aligns with traditional Arab practices for circumcision, often marking a transition to manhood.
So even though he's not the covenant heir in the primary sense, his inclusion at this age connects him to Abraham's household and the sign.
And subtly acknowledges the distinct path his descendants would take, while still linking them back to this foundational moment with Abraham. It's quite intricate.
Verse 26 circles back to that immediacy again. On that very day, Abraham was circumcised, along with his son Ishmael.
There it is again. On that very day. Bem hayom hasa. Hammering home the promptness. Father and son undergoing it together.
Sharing the experience, despite their different covenantal destinies. And finally, verse 27 wraps up by emphasizing the full scope once more. And all the men of Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him.
It summarizes that comprehensiveness. Karon Nasheto, all the men of his house, repeating the categories born in the house, bought from a foreigner.
They were circumcised teto with him, showing solidarity, inclusion.
And this is a really powerful point commentators often make. The covenant community, right from the start, wasn't strictly about bloodline. It included everyone under Abraham's responsibility.
Including those bought from a foreigner. That's quite radical for its time, isn't it?
It is. It hints at an inclusivity that transcends ethnicity, foreshadowing, perhaps, how people from all nations would eventually be brought into God's covenant family through faith. Membership was about being part of the household and receiving the sign.
That walkthrough is helpful, but now let's pull back and draw on some specific scholarly insights from our notes. It's always fascinating to see how careful readers highlight certain nuances, sparking those aha moments. What are some reflections that really stand out?
Well, one thing that consistently comes up is Sarah's name change. It wasn't just cosmetic. Scholars like Baldwin and Waltke see it as fundamentally elevating her. Baldwin points out her new status, princess, mother of nations and kings. She's positioned right in the covenant line.
Right, and Waltke adds that this renaming does something. It prepares her, and us, for her active role, indispensable, even if sometimes flawed, as we see later. She's not passive. God himself affirms her crucial role. She's a covenant partner alongside Abraham.
Then there's Abraham's laughter. We touched on it, but the scholarly discussion is rich. Is it joy? Doubt. Hamilton suggests it's ambiguous, maybe mixed. Waltke leans towards incredulity, especially given the plea for Ishmael right after. The human impossibility looms large.
And Baldwin's perspective that it's faith's expectancy clashing with the fear of misunderstanding God that captures the internal struggle so well, I think. It's grappling, not outright rejection. It paints such a real human picture.
It really does. And concerning Ishmael Hamilton, Waltke, they all stress God does give him substantial blessings. Fruitfulness, 12 rulers, a great nation. God is gracious.
Hugely gracious. But they emphasize it's distinct from the Berit Olam, the everlasting covenant, which verses 19 and 21 explicitly reserve for Isaac. Grace extends broadly, but the specific redemptive covenant has a designated channel.
And John Walton's insight about Ishmael's age 13 connecting to later Arab traditions that adds such an interesting historical resonance. It validates Ishmael's distinct lineage, tracing back to Abraham through the sign while keeping Isaac's covenant role unique.
That kind of detail really brings a text alive in its historical context. And finally, that repeated phrase, on that very day. Waltke and Baldwin see Abraham's immediate obedience as crucial.
Absolutely. It's presented as a direct, tangible expression of his faith. No delay, despite the personal cost, especially at 99. It's commitment in action.
Exploring these scholarly viewpoints deepens our understanding, but the ultimate value lies in connecting it to our lives and ministries today. So, how does this passage, Genesis 17:15-27, speak into the realities faced by believers, especially pastors and leaders?
There are several really potent takeaways here. First, and perhaps most obviously, is that God's promises often seem impossible by human standards. A child for a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman, that's Exhibit A.
Absolutely. It forces us to confront the limits of our own logic and resources.
Right. It teaches us that our faith must rest on God's faithfulness and his unlimited power, and not on whether things seem feasible to us. When you're in ministry and facing situations that look completely stuck or challenges that seem insurmountable.
A declining congregation, deep-seated community problems, maybe financial crises.
This passage is a powerful reminder. God operates outside our constraints. Remember Luke 1.37, "For no word from God will ever fail." Our trust has to be in the promiser, even when the promise looks absurd.
That's number one.
What else? Second, there's the matter of timing. Abraham had waited years, and even after this specific promise, there was still a year's wait for Isaac. God's timing is perfect, but it often involves waiting.
And waiting is hard, especially in ministry where we long to see fruit.
It is. But this passage reminds us delays aren't denials. Often the waiting period refines our faith, forces us to depend more fully on him, and ultimately makes his eventual action even more glorious because it's clear he did it, not us. Patience and trust in his sovereign timetable are vital for endurance.
That's so crucial for avoiding burnout and discouragement. Okay, a third reminder.
Third, look at how God responds to Abraham's plea for Ishmael. He hears, he cares, he promises significant blessings, even though Ishmael isn't the primary covenant heir.
So God's care extends beyond the central covenant line.
Exactly. It shows God's broad compassion. While his specific redemptive plan unfolds through Isaac, and ultimately Christ, his love and attentiveness reach wider. This encourages us in pastoral care to pray for and genuinely care for everyone, those inside and outside the immediate church family. God hears our prayers for others and desires their well-being.
That's a helpful balance between God's specific election and his universal love. What about obedience?
Fourth, Abraham's immediate and comprehensive obedience with circumcision on that very day is stark. True faith acts. It's not just internal belief, it's demonstrated through tangible response.
Like the New Covenant signs baptism, the Lord's Supper are our responses.
Precisely. The principle is that faith leads to obedience, often prompt and sometimes costly obedience. For leaders, this means acting on God's word, responding to the Spirit's leading without delay, even when it's hard or requires sacrifice. Believing isn't enough, doing matters.
And one final point.
Finally, Sarah's elevation, her renaming, her role as mother of nations, alongside the inclusion of the whole household, even foreign slaves, in the covenant sign. It speaks volumes about inclusivity.
God's family isn't homogeneous or exclusive based on human standards.
No. Right from the start, there's this principle of inclusion and a vital role in all members. For the church today, it underscores the equal dignity and essential contribution of everyone, male, female, every ethnicity, every social background. It calls us to build communities where all are valued and empowered.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've seen Sarah brought powerfully into the center of the promise, the astonishing nature of Isaac's promised birth, God's gracious yet distinct blessings for Ishmael.
And that demanding call for immediate comprehensive obedience through the covenant sign, teaching us about faith in impossible circumstances, trusting God's timing, understanding his broad care, the necessity of active obedience, and the inherent inclusivity of his family.
It really shows the incredible depths we find when we linger over these texts, engaging with the details and the scholarly conversation around them.
It truly does. The layers of meaning just keep unfolding, offering so much for our understanding and our practice of faith.
And thinking about Abraham's experience wrestling with the sheer impossibility of God's promise, yet responding with that immediate, costly obedience for himself and his diverse household, it leads to a challenging question for us, doesn't it?
It really does. It makes you reflect personally, especially if you're in a leadership role.
So perhaps the question to ponder is this. Considering Abraham's struggle and his response, what seemingly impossible area in your own ministry, or maybe even your personal life, is God calling you to trust him with right now?
And flowing from that, what specific, maybe difficult, perhaps counterintuitive step of obedience might he be asking you to take today, on this very day, regardless of the apparent human cost or logic?
It could be related to anything, that ministry initiative that feels stalled, that difficult relationship needing reconciliation, that financial step of faith, that personal habit you know needs to change. Abraham's laughter, his doubt, was real.
But his obedience was immediate. What does that immediate, tangible, maybe costly act of faith look like for you right now in response to God's specific promise or direction, even when everything in you says, this can't possibly work?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis.